Welcome back to another week of Political Breakfast here on WABE. I'm Lisa Rayam, and with me are strategist Brian Robinson and Tharon Johnson. Happy Monday to both of you. The week after crossover day at the Gold Dome.
Yeah, man. I needed some rest this weekend. I had a long week, and because I had a long week, I had Ben Burnett fill in last week. So thank you, Ben, for doing that and keeping everybody in check for me. I appreciate it.
You know, we gave you a hard time for not being here.
Of course.
It's like, Brian's not here? What? Well, Brian very rarely misses.
Yeah, I had to do that because, when I miss it, so he's in an exotic island somewhere or he's, traveling the world. So we knew it had to be important, B-Rob, for you to just kind of miss. But no, it was a long week. Shout out Lisa to really, honestly, Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and Speaker Burns. They were determined to try to get us out of there on crossover day as soon as possible. Now, the House did go a little longer because they had a few more bills, but the Lieutenant Governor, Brian, you were down there, I know, a little bit as well all week. He was pretty determined to try to get us out of there sooner, but both men and their chamber workers and the staff and Ledge Council, which does a great job of reviewing these bills and producing them. And when you have these supplemental calendars coming out, everyone's just anxiously waiting to see which bills are going to actually make it on the calendars. And so just shout out to the staff members in the Lieutenant Governor's office and Speaker's office for pushing things through as quickly as they could.
Yep, that's a long day. And according to Speaker Burns, I don't really know where you get the records, but they say they passed 75 bills on Thursday, which according to them was a record for crossover day. That is a lot of work being pushed through there at the last minute to keep those bills alive over on the other side. So we still have a long 12 days left, say 12 as of Monday. By Tuesday, when this comes out, it'll be 11 days. We got a lot to get done still.
Yeah, sports betting wasn't so lucky on crossover day, right? I don't know. Could possibly resurface, maybe? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's remember that this is the first year of a biennial. So everything that is alive today, whether it passed by crossover or not, is still alive next year. So if there is a group that wants to really push this legislation, and it does take a lot of outside money to sort of educate Georgians and do a grassroots push to make sure that this issue gets pushed to the forefront. If somebody wants to push it, the bill is alive. There is the constitutional amendment, which is not something that can be easily done this year because there's no vehicle on which you can attach a constitutional amendment when nothing's passed by crossover day. But there is also implementing legislation that theoretically could get attached to legislation on one side or another, get included in a conference committee and be passed. And then next year, only the constitutional amendment would be waiting. That seems highly unlikely. It seems like it's not something that even the supporters are going to want to take up at this section, this time in the session. But look, the issue is one that won't go away forever because 39 other states have done it. We are a part of a distinct minority. And some of those states that don't have it have other types of gaming, such as California, where the gaming is done by the Indian tribes. So we're a distinct minority when it comes to not having any access to sports betting in this country. That pot of money is going to be very enticing when budget times tighten in the future. So it'll be revisited. It's a little easier to forego revenue when you're sitting on $16 billion in surplus funds.
I like it because it's been revisited. How many sessions?
I think 2 or 3. That's not that unusual. I think this is something that Tharon knows as a lobbyist that, when you first introduce something, very few things get introduced and pass the first year. If there takes any sort of public education element, it takes a couple of years for it to work its way through the process. Even stuff that seems fairly non-controversial. I worked on Marcy's Law, the Victims' Bill of Rights Amendment back in like 2016, 2017. Didn't get passed until 2018, something that passed unanimously essentially once it got to the floor. But you had to educate, you had to slowly move the ball forward. And that's actually a good thing. We don't want them to act too fast on big things like this. It takes some study. Just look at the consequences, the unintended consequences as well. So it's a good thing. It's part of the process.
Yeah, Lisa, I think the reason why it feels like it's been going on so long is because we also in the state of Georgia have been in a robust conversation about whether or not we should legalize casino gambling. And so that's started off a long time ago. Now you bring in sports betting. So if you think about gambling in its totality, yeah, it does feel like a long time. But I want to give a shout out to State Representative Marcus Riedauer down in Athens, Georgia. Representative Riedauer is a friend. I know Brian knows him very well. But when I tell you, Lisa, this state representative worked very, very hard to really revive a sports betting bill that was very quietly moving through the legislature. I was told by many sources that there were the votes there. Like, had it probably made it to the House floor, it would have passed the House, and then it would have went over to the Senate, and then you would have probably had a very robust debate. But Marcus Riedauer and others had actually been meeting with folks quietly and getting the sports teams, the FanDuels, the DraftKings of the world, and all these, other people to be okay with the licensing. And then it became a conversation about the revenue. And to Brian's point, like, where would the revenue go? Would it go for hope? Would it go towards early childhood education? Would there be enough in there for rural communities to feel like they would be able to generate and profit from the amount of revenue that's expected with bringing sports betting? But as we wrap this up, to me, Lisa, it's just common sense. I mean, we're now in 2025. 39 other states have done this. We should be able to legally go to our devices and bet on sports. Georgia is a place that has hosted a Super Bowl. We'll be hosting, has hosted multiple Super Bowls. We'll be hosting another Super Bowl. We just hosted a national championship. We're bringing the FIFA World Cup here. We will be hosting another Final Four soon. We are a place where NASCAR is prevalent. We host a Tour Championship golf event that is the number one ending sporting event in PGA golf, where you basically crown the best golfer of that period, that year. So it just doesn't make sense for Georgia to be this state with all of this great sports success, and you have people who are willing to do it responsibly and do it legally. I think we just can't get it there. So, Lisa, what I think needs to happen is this, and I'm going to be a little partisan. I think that what I keep hearing about sports betting, Democrats always feel like it's the go-to for Republicans, and it gives them an opportunity to lock down if they feel they're not getting other things that they want, right? Here's my free advice, because B-Rob know I'm all out of free in 2025. They need to sit down with lobbyists and communicators like Brian and others. Let's get in a room. The Metro Chamber has been doing a fantastic job of trying to move this ball down the field. The Georgia Chamber kind of did it a little bit. But you got to get more people at the table. Chris Riley, who now is the chief of staff for Speaker Burns, he and I worked together when we were both kind of representing sports teams, and we almost got it there. But Lisa, there needs to be a robust conversation with rural Republican legislators to make the case to them that this could work, right? I know you're concerned about betting. There is a stigma that comes along with gambling. And then you also got to make sure that the Dems, you talk to them now. So I hope that Representative Riedauer and others will not end this quest. As Brian just said, this is a 2-year period, right? This bill can come back up next year, but start talking to the Democrats now. Get the rural legislators, many of whom have concerns about the bill, on board. Let's make it make economic sense, and let's start working on it now. And you got to expand the team. I'm not saying go out and hire 24 lobbyists, but you got to have lobbyists and consultants. You got to have that third party validation that's going on. You got to get into the community, because there's no reason why we shouldn't have this. And I think that the next gubernatorial nominee on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, are going to have to make a commitment to sports betting. I really do. I think that the public wants it. It just unfortunately can't get through the legislature because of politics. But Marcus Riedauer and others will probably continue to have this conversation. And it's just something that I think that we got to go beyond the chambers. The chambers are doing a good job, but we got to go beyond them and give these legislators help to get the groundswell of support in the community to get this done next year.
Yeah, this is a world where dead isn't dead forever, right?
And I do want to add there. I want to second what he said about Marcus Riedauer, because Marcus did a fantastic job. And I'll say, as far as the votes being there, one of the main things Republicans want to be able to assure is what used to be called the Hastert rule. Probably not called that anymore, but since Hastert went to prison for inappropriate sexual contact with underage boys, but the Hastert rule was the majority of the majority had to be for something before it would get to the floor. And the majority of the majority in the House has 51 votes because there are 100 Republicans overall. So Marcus had about 47, 48 co-sponsors. So he was right there at that precipice. That's just of co-sponsors, not just yes votes. Mm-hmm. So that does show you just how very close it is and the number of votes that are there undergirding this effort. I think the Democrats probably need to make a firm decision on we're all going to be there if the funding goes to X. Maybe that will help. But Tharon mentioned the rural areas. And, of course, the pre-K funding is where this is going to go now. That's the current plan. Put this in pre-K, more pre-K seats, more pre-K teachers, higher teacher pay. That is, on its face, great for rural Georgia because and often in some of these rural counties, teachers are kind of the highest paid demographic in some of these parts of the state. So adding teacher jobs with state benefits, good pay, more places for 3- and 4-year-olds to go free to parents so that they can then enter the workforce. I mean, a lot of good for rural and urban areas with that plan.
But be wrong. I mean, and again, Marcus did a good job on this. I forgot to mention the co-sponsors. I mean, he had a long list of signatures there, but honestly, seriously, where do we think and I want to defend the Democrats for a second. Democrats, actually, I think the majority of them represents districts that want sports betting. I think the majority of them are for it. They're always concerned about the money and where is it going and how is it going to benefit their constituents. But what is the angst? Like, what is the pushback on the Republican side? Like, I specifically thought it was rural voters wanting to make sure pre-K and other things happen, but the House has always got to get on the same page. So why is it not an appetite for it in the House on the R side as much as it should be right now?
I think that there is a really strong voice of folks in powerful positions who just don't like betting. Okay. They just think it's bad for the community. They think it's bad for the state. They think it's bad for families. And so it is just a stand of conviction for these folks. And I don't dismiss that. That is important. There is such a thing as problem betting, right? There are people who hurt their families by being out of control. My argument on that is not that betting is great for anybody. It's that you can do it now on illegal sites very easily. You just put down an app that's illegal. The state cannot prosecute you. They can't find you. They don't know that you're doing it. And frankly, they probably don't really care that much. So that person has no consumer protections because it's an illegal site offshore. So there's no U.S. jurisdiction. And the state's not capturing the revenue that is part of this activity the way that they are in North Carolina and Tennessee, both states that are Republican states where this has been passed. So that's what I think. I do think it's a moral conviction, and I don't begrudge that. I get it.
Funding. You mentioned some funding earlier, and any surprises here with the big DEI conversation all over, national news and local news as well. Anti-diversity funding in public schools failed. Georgia Senate Republicans failed to advance a bill that it would have resembled the Trump administration's crackdown on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools and universities. Any surprises there for either of you?
Lisa, I'm so glad that we're starting with this, and I promise I'll, not try to take up too much time, but we got a lot of bills to get through. But to me, if it was one of the most controversial bills that I think that a coalition of people came together to stop was Senate Bill 120. This was a bill that would withhold public funding from K through 12 public schools, colleges, or universities that promoted diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And the fact that it did not reach a vote was not because there wasn't a political will there early in the session to do so. This was a Senate bill that was moving. What you saw, Lisa, were groups, many of whom volunteers, advocates, came all to the Capitol, and they joined Democratic legislators to say, this is a bad bill. We need to stop this. So there was press conference after press conference, a very legitimate argument made about how this was not something we need to do in Georgia. This bill could have a lot of negative impact on our educational opportunities and advancements that we like to pride ourselves on. And I think that some Republicans heard these advocates loud and clear. And this is why Senate Bill 120 did not make it to a vote. And so now we knew it was coming. The president, as Brian has reminded me, campaigned on this. We saw Georgia Republicans talking about DEI. We had a lieutenant governor who talked about taking the word diversity out of curriculums last year. But this was one that you saw that nonviolent protests, First Amendment rights, and coalition building stopped this bad bill from coming up.
Brian, any thoughts there? Any real surprises?
I don't think that it shows that the Republican caucuses are in support of DEI programs. I think probably this is another one of those issues that probably needs to get a few more hearings, a little more education, and probably a little more fine-tuning, because we need to figure out how is this really going to be implemented in the state. Would it outlaw, for example, African American history studies? Would it outlaw Black History Month? I don't think that that is the intent of it. I think what they're really going after is having these middle management positions of DEI administrator, DEI supervisor. Those things are out there. I don't know if they're in the public school systems. I assume they are in some places. We know that they have had some on college campuses. When my wife and I were shopping for my daughter's school a few years ago, when she was leaving preschool to go into kindergarten, we would go visit these private schools, and one of the people who would come and speak to us would be this person with a PhD who was the school's DEI facilitator, administrator, whatever the title was. And I just remember thinking, like, how much are you getting paid? Why do they need a PhD doing this job? This seems like a really, really expensive program that y'all have here to take on a employee whose title is this on a very relatively small campus. I think getting rid of any of that DEI bureaucracy would be something that would have a lot of support. I think if it's narrowly targeted to that, it would be able to get through the legislature. But I do think we need to be careful that we're not saying that we can't have any sort of ethnic studies, any sort of historical viewpoints where race matters, because of course race matters in our history. And I think it's got to be discussed in serious ways. Obviously, there's been some pushback amongst conservatives in recent years about history that makes white kids feel bad about being white. I think that's been something you've heard throughout many of these thematics. And I think that's legit. And I think that's been covered by like the CRT legislation in recent years to keep critical race theory out of classrooms. So narrowly targeted, I think that this is something that could get widespread support and could pass the General Assembly.
Yeah, one of those things you felt the energy last week. It received a lot of energy and a lot of attention as well. Quickly, school safety bills in the House and Senate. A couple important ones passed. Senate Bill 17, named in honor of one of the victims of the deadly Appalachia High School shooting. There was Senate Bill 61 that would try juveniles aged 13 to 17 as adults, and then House Bill 268. Speaker John Burns called this one the session's most important bill. And Brian, I see you shaking your head there. It would require districts transfer new students' records, create behavioral health threat assessment teams, and hire a mental health coordinator to assess students and treat students and what have you. You're in agreement there.
Absolutely. And I think, this is something that was a very emotional topic here on this show with me and Tharon over the last year when they had that Appalachia shooting. That was very upsetting. And we clearly need to take on what is one of the most pressing public safety issues in not only our state, but our country, with serious reforms, a serious strategy to be able to figure out who is a threat and neutralize them, but also to make sure that kids in general, at a time when we're experiencing a mental health crisis amongst our children, and we got to figure out what that's all about and get to the root causes. But in the meantime, what the state can do is make sure that there are resources for these kids if they are having mental health struggles, that there is a counselor that they can go to and trust and get professional help. And that person, therefore, can better figure out where the red flags are in a particular school. I think it's super important that we're able to track these kids from school to school. That's an important reform. That's part of what happened at Appalachia. There was a kid who had trouble in the Jefferson City school system, moved over to the Barrow County system, and there was never any communication going, hey, this kid's troubled. There is something dark and
sinister. Many loopholes.
Yeah.
How does that happen? How does that happen?
And of course, there's security grants that are involved as well. That's building on some of that school security funding we've done in the last couple of years. and the funding that we've done to have the school security alert systems, which actually saved lives in real time at the Appalachia shooting.
Yeah, Lisa, I've been very complimentary of Speaker Burns for his leadership on this issue. He has made it a personal issue. You may remember, as Brian just mentioned, I called on more Republicans and more Democrats to speak up and speak out against this tragedy that happened at Appalachia High School. But this bill was named after victims of the Appalachia High School and the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shootings, Ricky and Alyssa's Law. And the fact that, it focused heavily on what Brian just talked about, I'll just add a couple more things. We can't forget, one of the core reasons we saw what happened at Appalachia is because of the lack of parental responsibility. We had parents who did not exhibit responsible gun ownership. And again, you've heard me talk about it. It's about responsible gun ownership. They did not have the mechanisms in place to give access to a 14-year-old who was troubled, who was clearly going through something emotionally and mentally. And not only did they not secure their guns, and that's a conversation that Democrats have been pushing, more safe storage laws, but they actually gifted him a gun during his birthday. So consequently, we ended up having lives that were lost. The football coach, shout out to him. He decided to retire because it's just been too stressful. And then lastly, Lisa, and I'll wrap this up. You've heard me say this. This is a great step forward what the speaker is doing. And Democrats joined him in that. But we also need to have a well-trained, armed resource officer in every single school in Georgia, especially in our elementary schools and our middle schools. We have them in our high schools, but we need to make sure that these counselors are supported. And as Brian just laid out, when these students move from school to school for whatever reason, whether it's parents getting a new job or they want to relocate, these teachers and counselors need to have the information available for them to know that what's going on with these kids. But I just really hope that we won't see more tragic shootings in schools. But just shout out to the Republicans and Democrats who passed this bill. And at least if I can mention one more that, full disclosure, I do work with MARTA. But one of the things that came up last year was a request from MARTA to deal with bus rapid transit. Had a little movement. It didn't get through the House, but the House voted, lawmakers in the House voted to basically move to the Senate a request for more bus rapid transit in the Summerhill area. So to kind of go through downtown, there was a robust debate about cameras and the use of cameras and the fines. And so MARTA was able to really sit down and listen to some legislature. So that passed the House, and now it's going over to the Senate.
Well, it was certainly a busy week last week, and you all have summed it up well for us. We're going to close out the show here, but when we come back later in the week, I want to talk about Georgia Democratic State Senator Elena Parent. She's receiving some heavy criticism and being attacked for a vote regarding some taxpayer funding of trans surgeries of prisoners, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the week. So we're going to wrap up here and call it a day. What do you think?
Sounds good, guys. Good to see y'all.